Greetings, everyone. My name is James Akers. I'm a registered architect, full-time professional renderer, creator of the iPad for Architects YouTube and Instagram channels, and professor of iPad drawing at UCLA. And I'd like to welcome you to this lesson in what I call hybrid rendering. Now, I'll tell you about what that is in just a second, but first I'd like to explain how the iPad led me here today. I became a full-time watercolor renderer years ago, before computer rendering changed everything. Because back then, being an architect and a renderer meant I could help my clients design their projects as I was rendering them, and that gave me the best of both worlds. It was inevitable that computers would replace hand renderings, though, but designing and rendering by hand has never lost its appeal. So when the Apple Pencil came out in 2015, I saw its potential to update designing and rendering by hand for the 21st century. So I bought my first iPad, and I haven't looked back since. Now I teach courses in Procreate, Morpholio Trace, and SketchUp for iPad that help you discover the power of iPad drawing. I also try and make them interesting and memorable, like this thought I recently had about sometimes in this crazy life, you get a chance to make a proposal for a life-changing job. But in order to get that chance, you might have to produce a rendering of your idea in less than 24 hours. And that could be a deal breaker, so you're out of luck, right? Well, not necessarily, because with a little ingenuity, you can use Procreate to make what I call a hybrid rendering in as little as 2 hours. And you can make it as hand-drawn looking or as photorealistic looking as you like. And the best part is that the technique can be used for either interior or exterior renderings, even if you don't think you draw well, as in the case of this rendering I made for the government of Dubai, or these renderings made by my UCLA students who would be the first to tell you they don't draw well. The basic idea is that instead of constructing and rendering a 3D perspective of your design, you browse the internet for a photo of a room approximately the same size as the one you are designing, plus the furniture and entourage elements you want to put into the rendering. Then use the powerful editing and drawing tools of Procreate to combine those images into a super fast rendering of your design idea. To give you a sense of what's coming, I'm going to break down today's exercise into 6 sections. 1. Getting your photos set up on iCloud. 2. Launching the project in Procreate. 3. Importing the FF&E images. 4. Retouching the base photo. 5. Finishing the rendering. And 6. Creating a bonus lighting study in minutes. So be sure you stay till the end for that. So we begin our journey by launching the base photo, and I've got mine in my Photos album. So I'll go to the Photos tab and I'll tap that photo and up it comes, and it comes in at iPad screen size. Now I launch a new layer, and I call this a layer of trace because I fill that layer with white. Then I scale back the opacity. Then I add a layer above that. I select the color red, and I select the technical pen, and that's what I'm going to use to make my roadmap. Now this is a throwaway layer that I'm going to use to help me keep track of how I'm going to alter the underlying photograph. I'm going to be retouching this photograph to get rid of all these areas so I can place my design over the top. Now on another new layer, I'm going to find the vanishing points and reverse engineer the vanishing points of this photo. And this part is necessary later on for estimating the proper perspectival angle of all the things we're going to import. And you'll see that in a moment. So I'll just start drawing lines that are parallel to the parallel lines in the photograph that go off to the vanishing points to the right and to the left. And I just want to concentrate on the line itself. I don't care where that line ends up. I'm trying to make it line up with the photograph. And here we go to the left vanishing point. Again, just concentrate on the line in the image and don't worry about where the intersection goes. Now I'm ready to actually locate the vanishing points in Drawing Assist, so I go to the Actions menu, I tap on the Canvas tab, and I tap on Drawing Guide, and that activates Drawing Assist, but you'll notice when you tap Edit Drawing Guide, it's in 2D grid mode. So I'm going to come over here and switch to perspective mode. And now I'll use pinch and zoom to sort of focus in on that area. And I'm going to come up to this color slider at the top and slide it all the way over to black so I really can see these lines clearly. And I'll tap once, and I'll try and align it with those parallel lines that I've drawn in red before. And it's not an exact science, but you just kind of wiggle it until you're close, and that looks pretty good. Now I'll pan over to the left vanishing point and I'll do the same. I'll try and estimate where that line goes. And again, I'll use that slider up at the top to make that line with more contrast so I can really see it. And that looks pretty good, so I think I am ready to go to the next step. So that's what I like to call the prep work being done, and now we are ready to import those images that we stored in our iCloud drive. So I'll go to the Actions menu and then to Insert a File. Inside the iCloud drive, I'll scroll down to the folder called Sketching Retreat, iPad for Architects Assets. I'll tap on that folder, and that brings up all the furniture we're going to import for the rendering. And I want to bring in this fireplace first, so I'll tap that, and in it comes. And I'm going to use pinch and zoom just to make it a nice big workable size so I can see everything clearly. And I'm going to switch to the selection tab, the selection in freehand mode. I'm going to turn off color fill so I don't get in trouble. And now in freehand mode, I'm going to tap my way around this image, selecting only the part I want to use. Now, when you're in freehand mode, you can both tap from vertex to vertex like this, and it makes it very quick, but you can also draw freehand. You can pause at any point and draw freehand like I am around these glass decorative globes. I'll come back down here, and I'll be very careful to close up the loop. And when that's all selected, I'll come down to the bottom of the screen and go to Copy and Paste, and that lifts up a copy and puts it on its own layer. So now I can go to the layer below and delete that, and I am ready to roughly locate this fireplace now in my rendering. So I'm going to go now up to the Move and Transform menu, and I'll go to Flip Horizontal and give it a quick reorientation. Now I'm going to work in freeform mode and just sort of massage that fireplace roughly into the position that I want. Now notice I haven't retouched the underlying base photo yet, but I'm just roughly locating these objects so I can start to organize it. And you can see where these red guidelines come in handy now, because I'm basically transforming the fireplace so it fits the perspective of the underlying photograph, and this is getting it set up, and that looks pretty good for now. Now let's look at another way to get rid of the background of one of these imported objects. So I'll go back into the Insert a File menu, and I'll go to this red chair this time, and in it comes. Now this chair I was lucky enough to find on a completely white background. So I can use selection now in automatic mode, and this is so fast and easy. I'm just going to tap and hold down my pencil, slide it to the left or the right to determine how much I select from the background. I have to be a little careful about not over-selecting the chromium chair base here, but that looks pretty good. Then I'm going to use a 3-finger swipe and tap Cut, and that's going to eliminate that. And it already is on its own layer, so now I can freely move it around using Move and Transform in uniform mode, and that's all I need to do for now, and I can move on to the next object. So that's freehand and automatic selection, but you can't always be so lucky when you find these objects on the internet. Sometimes you're going to find furniture that you really want to use, but the background is kind of murky. It's very close in tone to the object you're trying to separate from. So let's look at one of those, what I call removing a messy background. So here's a beautiful table that I want to use in my rendering, and the first part is pretty easy. I do that tap and hold and swipe left and right to get to these to select as much as I can of the background. But I still have a lot of rough areas, and this is where, to be perfectly honest, I'm just going to go with my rendering philosophy, which is that things don't have to be perfect. In fact, the cumulative effect of a rendering is the most important thing. And very often, look how rough this is around the edges, but I guarantee you no one is going to notice. So I can keep moving with my rendering, and I can get the effect of the piece without worrying about how perfect the selection was. Now, if your rendering is complicated or has a lot of pieces like this, what I like to do is sometimes group these into layers so I can toggle that layer on and off. And to do that, you saw me swipe left to right on the individual layers, and then I tap the group icon so I can put all of these inside a single folder and toggle it on and off to help keep me organized. Now, all I have to do is finish up by bringing in this bookshelf that we're going to use later on, and you'll see that's kind of fun. And I'll bring in that rug, and now we are ready for the next section. Now, when you clean up this underlying photo so that it serves as a neutral background, the first thing you're going to do is add a layer above the photo itself. That's going to be our retouching layer. And with that layer activated, I'm going to now work from large to small. I'm going to go to the Selection tab. I'm going to select freehand again, and I'm going to use that same point-to-point technique we used with the fireplace and work my way around this wall. And I'll slow it down a little bit for this section just so we get that basic principle in mind. And I'll go point to point along this wall to select it all. And remember, I'm selecting it on that new layer. So now I'm going to go to the soft brush in the brush menu. And now once the brush is activated, I can tap here on the left and bring up the color picker. And I'm going to work that color picker around the wall to pick up the different tones in the different parts of the wall. I also want to use the brush slider to adjust the size of the brush and maybe even the opacity of the brush. I make that 100%. And I'll use that color that I've selected now and start to cover up and paint in the rest of that wall to make it that neutral background we talked about. I'll go right over the painting. Now I want to pick up this darker tone at the bottom of the wall because it really is like photo retouching. So I'll use that color picker and smooth that wall out, and that's wall number 1. Now sometimes it's not so easy just to paint in a simple wall on one of these underlying photographs. So let me show you a more interesting application. I'm going to go into my selection tool in freehand, and I'm going to basically pick out this sofa because I still want to use the sofa, but I also want to get rid of all the foreground elements in front of it. I'm not going to use any of those accessories. So I'm back in freehand mode. I'm combining that with point-to-point selection with freehand drawing around these pillows. And I'll basically isolate this sofa. And then I will come down to the bottom. And this time I'm going to use copy and paste again. And you'll recall that puts that sofa on its own layer. So now I can manipulate that sofa all on its own. Then I'm going to use the color picker again. When I'm in brush mode, all I have to do is touch that little square off to the left side. And I'm going to pick up each color area by area and basically airbrush it over those accessories in the foreground. I'm not too worried about covering up the sofa or going beyond the edges of the sofa because I can go back to the original sofa layer, tap select. That will select the boundaries of that original sofa that I took quite a bit of care in making, and then I can invert that selection, and as long as I'm in the sofa patch layer, I can use 3 fingers then to cut anything that goes beyond the original boundary of that sofa selection. And just in case you thought I was going to forget to add the joints back in the sofa, I'll go to that sofa patch layer. I'll dial back the opacity just a little bit. I'll add a new layer above that so I can see where I'm going. And I'll pick this script pen. It's a favorite of mine. It's very responsive to touch. I'll select the color of the shadow inside using the color picker, and then I'll replace those joints in the sofa. That'll make it look like it's just brand new and right off of a manufacturer's catalog. Now I want to show you how cool it is to recolor something like this, but first I'm going to have to merge these layers. We've got 3 layers for this sofa retouching now, joints and the sofa patch. So I'll tap on a layer and then hit the merge in the drop-down menu, and that creates a single layer. And now I can just tap and drag that orange color over and release it, and it'll stay within the boundaries of that sofa and recolor the sofa. Now that's just a placeholder color for that sofa because one of the amazing things about Procreate is your ability to retroactively modify these colors. But we'll look at that later in the process, and let's get on with the business of rearranging all these parts to make a beautiful rendering. So congratulations, all the hard parts are done, and now it's just the pure fun of creating this rendering out of nothing, just creating the magic of the rendering out of all these things we've imported. And because each of these pieces is on its own layer when we imported them, you're just going to go back into that layers menu and go to each layer one by one, then use the move and transform tool in the best mode to stretch or sort of make each piece comply with the laws of perspective in the photo. Now that's going to be pretty straightforward for most of these pieces, but sometimes you're going to come across a piece that just refuses to comply with the laws of perspective in the drawing. And let's look at a really quick fix for what you do when that's the case. Now, this wooden end table is a very important part of my design, but I could only find one photo of it on the internet. And when I try to use the two easiest tools inside the transform menu, the freeform tool and the uniform tool, I can't quite get the table to fit the laws of perspective. It's just a little too flat. So I'm going to go into the freehand mode and select just the top of the table. And I'll do a cut and paste 3-finger swipe. And now I've got that selected, and I'll just go back into freeform and alter only the top. So it's becoming kind of a composite piece, and I'll make that as close as I can. I don't have to finalize it yet because it's going to come down to the very end and making everything look right, but that's not too bad. And obviously I have to fix the bottom half as well. So I'll do kind of a circular swipe on it because I'm hoping that blends in a little better. And then I can isolate that on its own layer, move it up and down, use freeform tool to really adjust that piece to make it look like the bottom of the stool is in fact complying with the laws of perspective. And then in keeping with my philosophy that things do not have to be perfect, I'll just use the eraser to roughly clean it up. You can see it's very pixelated at the bottom, but it really will not make a difference at the end. And if it does, you can call me on it. So that's how it's sometimes easiest to actually disassemble an object and reassemble it to make it look good. But let's look at this one now. This chair, again, I love this chair. I absolutely had to use it in my design, but none of the usual tools are working. So I'm going to switch to warp mode, and I'm going to begin to literally individually change the parts of the chair to try and make it look more like it's in the foreground, that you're looking down on top of it a little bit. And I'm going to go back and forth between modes, back and forth between warp and uniform and freeform. And amazingly, it sort of keeps the quality of the chair together. The photograph doesn't look that bad. And eventually, it gets pretty close to what I want. And the beauty of this process is if some change that you make affects the whole rendering, you can always go back to any part and slide it over a bit. No one's ever going to know that this fireplace moved 6 inches just to make the rendering look better. Now, everything we've done so far has been a very small, self-contained object, but what about adding a rug? And this is going to stretch right outside of the frame of our drawing. So let me show you some tricks for dealing with this. First, I'm going to select the rug, and I'm going to use distort mode because distort mode allows me to move each of the handles independently. And you can see the problem I'm going to get into. The back 3 areas are pretty good, but this foreground area, it's going to be hard to make the rug match the perspective. So I have to basically shrink the rendering down by using pinch and zoom. So I have adequate room below the frame of the drawing to stretch the rug all the way so again, it can comply with the laws of perspective. Now this bookshelf is worth taking a little extra time on too, not because it doesn't fit, but because the bookshelf itself isn't a complete image. There's this area over here that shows the bookshelf turning in the photo that I took the bookshelf from, and that's not good. I want a straight bookshelf all the way across. So I'm just going to use my bag of tricks and use a rectangular selection and pull it down right to that joint in the photo and then eliminate that. And then I can select the remaining image of the shelf and use either distort or freeform transformation mode and pull the shelf the rest of the way across to fill out the entire wall. Now the shelf has some other challenges too, like this part where the phonograph machine is to the left of the fireplace. So I'll copy a piece of the shelf from some other part of the shelf and just replace the photograph and put that right over the top of that, okay? And the sharp-eyed among you will see that there is a bed in the foreground of the right side of the shelf that's left over from that photograph. So I'll just copy a larger part of the upper left corner of the shelf and stretch that down and bring it over that bed. Now I'm also proposing in my design that there be a bookshelf in this hallway to the right of the shelf. So I'll go ahead and copy a section of that shelf again, and I will reappropriate it. I'll cut and paste it onto its own layer, and I will reappropriate it and put it down below that shelf so it doesn't interfere. And I'll bring it over now with a move tool, and I'll stretch it into position using the freeform mode, and I'll line that shelf right there. And later on, we'll add some shadowing to that shelf so it's clear that the second shelf is along that hallway, but we'll get into that in a moment. Now, in this bag of tricks that is so much fun teaching you, I want to show you one of the most important tools that I use on a daily basis, and that is the adjustments menu but in pencil mode, okay? Let's go over that again. We're going to tap the adjustments icon at the top left, then we'll tap hue, saturation, and brightness, but then we're going to tap this little black triangle, and from the drop-down menu, we're going to select pencil mode. Then inside the brush library, we're going to pick the soft brush, and here's where it gets interesting. Because we're going to come to the bottom of the screen and slide back the brightness slider so that Procreate knows when we alter these pixels on this layer, we want you to make them darker. Now, it's not an exact science, and notice that it actually doesn't make it darker so much as change the color. But then you want to correct that again with the hue slider, and you can use the saturation slider, and you can use the brightness slider. But basically what you've done is altered only those pixels, and then you assign the new value to those pixels. Now, I encourage you to stop the tape and watch that again because there's a lot of information in there, but in the meantime, notice that those same sliders can be used to alter the color of any layer. And this is one of the real reasons we put each of these pieces of furniture on its own layer, because you can come back in retroactively in Procreate at any time and alter the color of your individual pieces of furniture. And there is no greater superpower that an interior designer or even an exterior designer needs. And now for the payoff I promised you at the beginning. This is the lighting study, and watch how easy this is to do. Step 1 is to come to the top of the layers menu and add a new layer. This will be our so-called lighting study or twilight layer. Now I'm going to pick a gray-violet color, and you'll see why in a moment. And I'll select something down here, but I can always adjust it later. Maybe I'll take this one. And once I select that, I'm going to return to that layer that I created, and I'm going to go into the blending mode, the small letter N here, and I'm scrolling down to multiply. Now this is just like in Photoshop. When I have a multiply layer, I get the darkness of the layer, but I still get to see all the detail underneath that color. Now I can tap and hold on that dot of color and drag it over and release it on top of that layer, and you can see what happens. I get an instant kind of a dusky twilight thing. I can adjust the opacity of it. I can even go into the adjustments menu and adjust the hue, saturation, and brightness of this. And believe me, I do this many times while I'm creating these lighting studies. Now, adding that layer alone does not create the magic of a lighting study. Instead, what we're going to do is come in here and select some of the brightest areas. Obviously, this fireplace would be very bright. And once we've selected it, we're going to 3-finger swipe and delete just that section. And you can see the drama that creates. Instantly, that becomes the focal point of the room, but we're not finished yet. Now we're going to go up to the eraser brush, and we are going to use the soft brush again to erase away other areas of brightness. So for instance, this lampshade would be very bright. And I'll just erase a little bit of that twilight layer. I'm still in that twilight layer. And I can also reduce the size of the eraser and erase these points of light, these ceiling lights. And then I can use it and change the size of it to lighten the bookshelf where these ceiling lights will obviously pour light down across the books. And I can make very realistic moments like lightening the arm of this sofa where the floor lamp would hit it. But here again, some of the decisions we made earlier can come back to help us so much. So I can go into this sofa and select that layer, and then I can create a gradient of light coming from the fireplace by simply using the eraser to erase more of the twilight layer closer to the fireplace. So it really creates the illusion that the fireplace is making the sofa glow. And there really is no limit to the effects you can create with this simple technique that is so quick to implement and so powerful in selling your ideas to your client. I mean, how many designers will show up with a lighting study in the first 24 hours? Now, you don't have to be precise about all these areas that you're erasing, but it's awfully convenient to use the object itself as the basis of a selection to create one of these gradients. But I routinely, especially when there's very little time, I routinely just use it freehand, and I'll reduce the size of the brush as needed, and I'll just go over these individual areas, especially to create this striking illusion that there are highlights to the furniture already in the room. I mean, this creates so much depth and so much detail. Now, the last part of this is to actually throw some shadows on the ground. So we're going to take the illusion one step further, and say that the light that we've created is actually casting shadows on the ground. So let me show you a trick for this. We're going to add a layer immediately above the carpet. That way we'll be sure the shadows are cast down onto the carpet, but the shadow will also be below all of the objects that we've added. And just like the twilight layer, I'm going to make sure that that shadow layer is in multiply mode so that we see all the detail below the color. Now we're going to create the shadows with something I call select and fill. So I'm going to go up to the selection tab, make sure I'm in freehand. Then I'm going to use the selection tool in freehand mode to literally draw the shape of the shadow. Now I'm making this up, so it helps to have some drawing skill here. But I'm just going to loosely trace what I think would be the shape of that shadow and base it, of course, on the top of the table itself. And I'll complete that selection. Now watch as I drag and drop that shadow color over that selection. It fills right in. It is striking in how real it looks, but I'm going to soften it now. I'm going to go a step further, and in the Adjustments menu, I'm going to select Gaussian Blur and then just slide the pencil point left and right until I get just the right level of blurring of the edges of that shadow. And man, this is why I love this whole process. Look at that. Now I won't go so slow with the rest of the shadows, but I do want to show you one other cool thing. If you come down here and tap Color Fill, now every time you complete a selection, Procreate automatically fills it with that color. So you can really move fast, and it sort of augments this whole idea of being very loose and informal to give that kind of spontaneous feeling to your rendering. Now this is my favorite part of every rendering I do, the 5 minutes before the end when I know I'm done and it just feels good. So I'll lighten some of these areas, I'll add some detail, and maybe I'll add a painting over here to this wall. I'll go back into the iCloud drive, find that painting. With all my skills now, I can quickly get it up there, and voila, there is your rendering, people. And check out the before and after. There's before, there's after. Thanks so much for watching this lesson, and I'd really like to give you something to show you my appreciation. There's a link in the description below where you can download a zip file that contains 3 cool things. Number 1, the original Procreate file of this lesson, so you can see all the layers, turn them on and off, and see exactly what I did, and even use the video replay button to watch the rendering come together, but at your own pace. Number 2, the base photo and all of the FF&E images that I used in this lesson, so you can download them and recreate the lesson yourself. And number 3, as a special bonus, I'm giving you a one-click interactive guide to the 200+ Procreate, Morpholio, and SketchUp for iPad tutorials on my YouTube channel. This guide comes in both Excel and Mac numbers spreadsheet form, so you can sort the videos by title, by app, by tools within the app, and even by the number of views and likes each video has, so you can see which videos were most helpful to others like you. It's all included in the zip file, so please enjoy it as my gift of thanks to you. And if you'd like to learn more about the courses I teach, always in the context of the real-world tasks of architects and designers, check out the More Ways to Become an iPad Designer link also below, or email me at the address on your screen, and it will be my pleasure to advise you on what I think would be the next best steps for you. Until then, thank you again, and I will see you in the future.